Alright there, YouTube. Here we've got the Rowdy Rodney engine all put back together. Today's video, I'm going to show you how I rebuilt this engine. Now if you're expecting to see me sit there and blueprint this engine out, build an absolutely perfect engine to the T using all the best, latest and greatest tools and techniques, this is not the video for you. I'm going to build this engine how people have been building engines in their garages and backyards for decades. This is not going to be a high-end build. I'm trying to build this engine for about the cost of a junkyard replacement. The goal here is to build this engine better than a used junkyard engine for about the same money, and I think we've succeeded at that. At the end of this video, I will do a cost breakdown of what it costs to build this engine. Everything that I spent out of pocket. Now I'm not going to count the used crankshaft that I used because I had that sitting on the shelf. I did have to put a new cam in it. I thought I had a used cam, I did not. But a lot of times your crankshaft will be good. This time it was not, so it is what it is. But what I spent on this engine I will break down at the end of the video. Alright, so I figured I'd probably better go ahead and turn the camera on here for a second. Now what I'm doing here is I'm going through and I'm checking ring end gaps. So as you can see, I've got a piston ring installed in each cylinder, and I've pushed it down squarely using a piston to make sure that it's pushed down into the bore squarely. And then I'm going to use a feeler gauge to measure the ring end gap. Now these are pre-gapped rings, so being that these are standard cylinders that have been honed, I would expect them to be on the larger side. Now I've already gone through and checked them all, and they're all between 16 and 18 thousandths of an inch. So you got a 16 thousandths of an inch feeler gauge. We're going to slide it into that ring end gap there. It's a little loose, so here's an 18 thousandths feeler gauge, and it does not want to slide in there, so it's smaller than 18, larger than 15, so that's just fine by me. I've gone through and I've done that on all of these. These are the top rings. I'm going to go ahead and pull these out, and then I'm going to put the second rings in and do the same thing for that. Alright, so now that I've checked the ring end gaps, I'm assembling the rings on the pistons here, and at this point I'm keeping track of which pistons go to what hole and keeping them the same, because I'm going to keep the rings in the same cylinders that I checked the ring end gaps on. So first we're going to slide this center piece of this oil control ring on, making sure that the gap is pointed upwards. Roll that on there. Then we're going to go ahead and roll the bottom ring on, and we're going to want to make sure that we stagger all of these gaps. So bottom one's on, and turn this, and then we're going to go ahead and roll the top one on. Those ones are done, and then the top ring and the bottom ring are separate, so you want to make sure that you keep track of them. You see there's a little dot on this one that faces up. So now rather than trying to roll this ring on like how I did the other ones, you're going to want to try to spread it. You don't want to try to twist these because they can be kind of fragile. Just spread it, drop it in the groove, spin that gap around to the back side there. And then we're going to do the same thing with the top ring. There we go, rings are on the pistons. Alright, so now with the piston rings checked and loaded up on the pistons, we're ready to set the crankshaft down in here. You can see I already put the new cam bearings in. You want to make sure that your block and your caps are totally free and dry, no oil. You want them as clean can be here. So they're all cleaned up, ready to go. Your furthest rear main bearing is the one that's different here. This is also acts as your thrust bearing. Line that up. It should roll into place there. There we go. The side with the oil groove you see this side's smooth. This side's got an oil groove in it. This side goes in the block. You see you have the same thing for the other mains here. So these are the ones we need here. Now I'm going to take my crankshaft, very carefully set it down in here. I'm going to take some of this, which is called plastic gauge. See, it's just a kind of like a putty or a plastic or whatever. I'm going to lay some pieces of this on all the main journals here. And then we're going to torque these to specs. I like to start from the middle, work my way out. Okay, run that down a little more. I'm going to snug them both up. Alright, now that these have all been torqued, we're going to go ahead and loosen them all up. Now we should be able to remove our caps and check our clearance. You can see that you got a little gauge on your thing here. That wide's 3/1000, that wide's 2/1000, that size 1.51. So we're just going to lay this on here and match it up. I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but we're right in between 2 and 3/1000, probably closer to the 3/1000 than the 2/1000. So we're going to call that 2.5/1000. Going to double check our measurement on the rest of these. Make sure that they are all the same. I'm just a standard small block Chevy like this. I'm just fine with anywhere between 2 and 3/1000. More than 3/1000, you're getting a little sloppy. Under 2/1000, you're too tight. So we're right in where we want to be. Alright, so now that we've checked all of our main bearing clearances and we've cleaned the plastic gauge back off of the rod journals, or technically not the rod journals, the crank journals. The last couple engines I've done, I've just used oil rather than assembly lube, and it's worked just fine. So and this is actually bar and chain oil rather than regular engine oil, so it is still, oh son of Alright, and then we just got to torque these caps down. Alright, so at this point the crank is in the block. I've got rods and pistons all put together, laid out in the order that they go in the engine. This is sitting in the same orientation as the engine. So okay, we got new rod bearings here, about ready to start stuffing pistons in this block. Okay, and then we're going to want to make sure that we lube these rings and everything all up good. Then we're going to drive the piston into the bore. There we go. Got it that time. There we go. Alright, so now that we've got our first two rods on here, we're going to want to go ahead and check our bearing clearances. You know, a guy gets used to working on all this big diesel stuff. You go back to working on something like this, all the torque specs seem so light. These only torque to about 45 foot-pounds. And we are drawing them down evenly before we go to torque. So now when we check this, you can see that we have more clearance than 1.5. And possibly just slightly less than 2. Alright, so we've got all 8 pistons and rods installed here now. And one thing you can kind of do sometimes, I didn't really record it because I was trying to get this done. I don't have a whole lot of time today. But if you have one bearing that comes up a little bit bigger on the size, and another one that comes up a little bit tighter, sometimes you can kind of swap bearings around, get your clearances closer that way. You're running into a little bit of manufacturing tolerances and stuff like that, so I did end up doing that. These two over here came out a little bit tighter, or a little bit looser rather, so I swapped one half of the bearing shells over to here, and it kind of evened everything all out. We're now all right about 2.5 thousandths bearing clearance, but the engine spins over freely. There is a little bit more resistance now because you got 8 pistons moving up and down the cylinders, but it spins over just as it should. So what we're going to do here next is start getting the cylinder heads ready. I've got this one kind of cleaned up here, and we're going to finish disassembling it. I've already checked all of the gasket surfaces and they're all nice and flat, which is nice. I swear a lot of times that these vortec heads come warped from the factory, but these ones are good. I was just going to check them for flatness and throw them back on. However, I do have a set of valve guide seals in my rebuild kit, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull the valves out, and then seems how we're going to take the valves out. We're going to go ahead and lap the valves and check our seats and our guides. Alright, so we're moving right along, getting these valves cleaned up and lapped in. Alright, so these exhaust valves were a little bit iffy. Started out looking something like that. Definitely a little pitted up. Quite a bit of pitting in the seats, but took a little bit of time, but they did clean up with lapping. See, nice clean smooth valve. Nice clean smooth seat, so that's going to work just fine. This head probably should have gone in to get a valve job, but around here machine shop probably charge about 600 bucks a head to go through these, and I'm trying to build this engine for junkyard engine prices. So basically I'm just trying to build an engine that's better than just throwing another junkyard engine in it for about the same cost. That's my goal here. So I got my next intake valve that I'm going to clean up here. Just going to take it, put it in the drill press here. Take a wire wheel. Nice clean carbon-free valve. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take this stuff. This is valve lopping compound. This stuff's by Permatex. I guess they're calling it valve grinding compound, but same thing. You're going to want to make sure that you put a little bit of oil on the valve stem. A little bit of oil down the guide, and you're going to want to make sure to be very careful not to get any of that valve compound on the stem, because you'll wipe your guide out in a real quick hurry. So you're going to just put a little bit of this on your finger, kind of dab it around like so. Go ahead and you put the valve in the guide. Now they make a little suction cup hand deal for doing this. Those things suck. I had one at some point, but I'm sure it's long gone in the trash can by now. So I use a cordless drill. And then I just kind of push on the valve with my finger on this end. You spin it, you pop it off the valve, and then you seat it back down. Okay, so you can see this is before and after of the valve. That's before and after of the seat. So we got to do this process 16 times before we're done with these two heads. Okay, so here's where we're at here now. We've got the short block more or less assembled. We got the rotating assembly in it. Cylinder heads are done and ready to go back on. However, I still don't have a camshaft yet, so that's going to complicate things here a little bit. So basically what I'm going to do here now is just basically try to get everything done that I can possibly do before installing the camshaft, so when that gets in we can shove that in, shove the timing cover on, shove the oil pan on, put the intake on, and this engine will be done. Alright, now generally what I do is I bring these up in about 3 steps. I just run them down snug, and then I torque them to 45, and then I torque them to 65. Now you're going to want to use a starter pattern. And then as I do my final torque, take a paint marker, mark each bolt head. Alright, so our new camshaft actually got delivered early. See Summit Racing 8800. I believe the cam specs here should be a good fit for what we're doing. It's a pretty mild cam. It does claim that it will work with the factory fuel injection and programming, so that's a good thing. Real quick here, you can see it's fairly short duration. 112 degree lobe separation angle. There's 1 degree of cam advance built into the cam. We're 450 thousandths valve lift on both intake and exhaust. This cam is set up for the factory roller block, which is what we've got. So you're going to pull this cam out, clean it up. get it installed. You're going to want to lube it up. So, we got our can of coffee here, which is really lifters soaking in motor oil. I'll go ahead and start dropping these guys in. Okay, then we remember to put our tone wheel for our crank position sensor on here, like so. And then we put this back on. We do it right because we do it twice. Alright, so we've got this engine all put together here now, and mine is dressing it with a few accessories and some things that will go on just to make installation easier. This engine is done. I'm leaving the distributor out until the engine goes in. I'll use an oil pump primer, prime the oil system before I start the engine, so we'll leave the distributor out, makes it so it's not likely to get damaged going in, and then we can prime the engine just before we're ready to start it. So we'll prime it, shove the distributor in. Bob's your uncle. So I wrote down a list of every part and the cost that I'd spent on this engine, and I was going to tell you here right now. However, I forgot that list at the house this morning, so you'll be seeing that in text on the side of the screen now. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe down below. Thank you. Have a great day.